Hello people, and welcome to an informative series where we investigate the world of old video games, analyzing myths, concepts, phenomena, and secrets. Things are not always what they seem. The first appearance deceives many, and to know more, we must explore beyond the limits of conventional thinking. It's 1985. From the hands of Shigeru Miyamoto and his team came Super Mario Bros. For the NES. The game would later be packaged with the NES as a bundle in 1986. Mario wasn't the first game Miyamoto was involved with, as his roots of video game development and design go as far as the 1970s, but it was however one of the biggest releases yet. A few years go by and Capcom wakes up from his slumber and makes their first big video game release on the same system, Mega Man. Capcom had been on the scene almost as long as Nintendo, so this was most likely expected. In a lot of ways, these games and their teams were in the same boat, with the same goal in mind: to try and see if the games they created could stick to the wall or not. While arguably Miyamoto probably had more experience at this point than Akira Kitamura and Keiji Inafune, the games had a lot of similar qualities. While Mega Man wasn't as popular as Mario after their releases, it was still so well received that everyone knows what it is. If I were to ask my parents now, 30-something years later, to name 3 franchises for the NES, they'd no doubt remember Mario, Mega Man and Zelda, and probably nothing else. They were the most documented at the time, and those were the games everyone were playing. I was visiting my mother a few years back and my phone rang. I had Mega Man's Nitro Man stage music as my ringtone, and my mother immediately goes, "Mega Man!" The style of music is integrated into everyone's mind so well that even if they have never heard of the song before, they know which game it belongs to. I know for a fact she hadn't heard of that before, as Mega Man 10 was released in 2010, long after I had moved out. And who doesn't remember Mario's theme song? You would have had to leave off the grid for several decades. Why are these 2 games so replayable today? They can be considered as primitive in today's day and age, and even after the sequels came out. Why do we still enjoy the original Mario and Mega Man so much? Why is it so logical to sometimes play the originals over the sequels? Literally speaking, it's quite simple. The original Super Mario Bros. Had 10 different enemy types, with some of them having a few variations. There's also a few stage hazards. Out of the 10 enemies, the game reuses 2 of them a lot more over the others. Essentially, the whole game only uses these resources to create challenge for the player. The issue with having less variety is apparent. It's that much harder to make the game more interesting. There is a reason why the game reuses 2 of the enemies a lot more than the rest, and it's based on a very smart design-based decision. Blowing all the enemies in the player's face immediately would make the game showcase everything it's got right from the start, and there would be no further mysteries to unravel or face. Goombas and Koopa Troopas are the most common occurrence in the levels. You'll see them everywhere. Why doesn't this get stale at any point? It is due to how they are being used. Imagine the levels being just nothing else but a straight line ahead, with no alteration in height or layout. Now imagine that these enemies come at you periodically, and you deal with them as they appear. Kung Fu comes to mind, and while it worked alright, it was by no means anything groundbreaking. This is where Mario excels. It puts enemies in different locations at all times. Enemy placement in a game like this will make or break the design. The game starts out simple, so you'll understand how to play it. It kills you a few times to teach you what not to do. The Goomba isn't your friend, and neither are the Koopa Troopas. At this point you know not to trust anyone. With good enough stage design, it becomes apparent that you don't need 100 enemy types to make your game interesting. It helps, but with mediocre level layouts, it doesn't aid the game as much as a game with less resources and better level design does. As you get comfortable dealing with Goombas and Koopa Troopas, the game throws you a couple of new surprises. These are not common, and upon first seeing them, you're shocked. This is something you're not used to, and it puts you outside of your comfort zone, which you just established. This is a common theme in the game, and it keeps happening throughout the whole experience. New enemies are slowly introduced to you, and you must deal with them in new scenarios all the time. Once you know all the enemy types, you'd think that's it. I learned it all, the rest should be easy. And this is where you realized you're wrong. The foes you encounter don't just come at you on plain ground level. They're near edges where they fall on you. They jump at you from the bottom of the screen. They come out of pipes in very difficult sections. They're placed in narrow corridors or on platforms right after big jumps. Fire sticks force you to move correctly and make hasty decisions. Fireballs make you think of your timing, and even Goombas are put to exceptional spots in the late game, making you question if you actually even learned anything. It is via this method of game design that Super Mario Bros. Is still replayable to this day. The game showcased how you don't need 50 enemy types to make a good game. It showcased how understanding the pacing of a video game is utterly important. The game shows you what's coming, and then tests you with the same mechanics over and over again, making you a master at understanding the inner workings of the game. This is essentially the premise for a good game of any kind. In baseball, you'll start off by knowing that the batter is going to hit the ball, and generally speaking it'll come at you. Where it goes, you don't know, but you'll understand the basics and the rules of the game. Over time, you get better at predicting the outcome of where the ball is going to go, and you'll start calculating all the possibilities in your head. This helps dealing with the future, as you already have the knowledge of all, or most of the possible outcomes. This is exactly what Super Mario Bros. Does. Here are the rules, here are the obstacles, and now prepare to deal with them in new and interesting scenarios until you master the game. The Goomba is a lot like the baseball. It comes straight at you, but not always. Sometimes it comes from above or in an awkward angle. How you deal with this is up to you, but you know that from now on, this is how it works. With only 10 enemy types and 2 to 3 enemies that repeat more than the others, it is clear that there isn't much in terms of design you can do. They somehow succeeded anyway via stage design and clever enemy placements. There is no dull moment in Mario 1 despite these discrepancies, and they knew they didn't need more power-ups either. Getting one hit point, becoming invincible, or the ability to shoot was clearly enough, as those power-ups could completely, yet again, change the whole game. There is no arguing that Mario 3 is the better game by a mile, but it was much easier to develop the game with a vast world full of different enemies. Mario 2 is my personal favorite, as I like the clean and sleek world it offered, with very interesting enemies and stages. Of course, Mario 2 and 3 are critically better games, but you can't deny how impressive the development of Mario 1 really was. Sometimes the idea of playing Mario 3 can feel exhausting because of its huge world, so picking up Mario 1 instead can feel like a breather. A well-designed game is a well-designed game. Not a lot of people can make that happen, but those who can write some of the most impressive history of all time. While the original Super Mario Bros. Isn't one of my favorite games, I can critically respect the work that went into it. With so little to work with, every aspect added into the game had to be exhausted over and over again until it was perfect. Have you ever thought about it? The coin sound that cuddles your ears every time you hear it? It's like soda addiction, it consumes you, and that was deliberate. The sound when you stomp enemies or hit blocks. All of the little things that are in the game are there for a reason. With so few assets, you have to make it count where you can. And that they did. The original Mega Man had a bit of a different approach. Albeit, the developers were in the same boat as Nintendo. It was their first big release, and it was really important that it succeeded. Otherwise, what would have been the point of releasing sequels? The original Mega Man has 16 enemies, so a bit more than Mario, but due to how the concept of Mega Man works, it only made sense. Super Mario Bros. Is one coherent world, Mega Man on the other hand is several different locations with different themes. This is not to say that Mega Man's enemies were groundbreaking, they might have been for the time, but at their core they were very simple and logical. Once you understand that Super Mario Bros. 3 and Mega Man 4 both have around 50 enemy types a game, it becomes clear what the original titles were working with. 1/5 of the amount that the later games had. On the surface, we have two very similar platformer video games. Both games are about fixing what is wrong with the world. How we get there works differently in both games, though you are expected to murder a bunch of your foes to get where you want. Where Mario works with what they have by placing enemies in clever locations and being a master at it, Mega Man's enemies are actually aware of his presence. Enemies don't just wander back and forth, they can tell you are there. Mets open up when you get close and shoot at you. Scrolling enemies spawn from your vertical location. Spines get faster when you stand on their platform. It's a living world, ready to dispose of you as quickly as possible. The overall outlook on the game is still very similar to Mario. The stages are simply made with clear lines and a path to follow. Graphics were primitive, but to me, simple is beautiful. It's easy to look at. Because the enemies are knowledgeable about the protagonist, the world feels alive, and you feel like a target, as you should. There is nothing wrong about Mario's take on the enemy behavior, whether it was lack of experience or whatever else, it created a fun world on its own, because you got used to the enemy behavior, but were constantly being surprised by the amazing placement of them. Having those harder enemies only pop up every once in a while was a smart design decision, and it played well with the idea of the game. Mega Man also did this, with Big Eyes, though critically speaking it's one of the worst enemy designs in the game. It has no tail, no nothing. Its jump heights are completely random, so without any tools or weapons, it's a gamble if you can make it under or not. Design like this shouldn't exist, but we were okay with it at the time. And with lack of experience and trying to cut corners, we get glitches or unwanted behavior, and being so early for video game development, nobody wanted to take risks. Instead, they put all of their energy into the music, sound effects, and game design with the assets they got. This is exactly what made Atari games so great. Simple premise, cool sounds, and extremely addicting gameplay. Mega Man also mixes brain-dead enemies with its design as well, so Mario-like enemies that just either scroll off the screen or go back and forth. You could argue that Mega Man actually did a better job at designing enemies and their patterns than Mario, but at the end of the day, these were the first games of their respective franchises, and both titles nailed the gameplay to the T. Lack of enemy types or enemy behavior doesn't matter if you're good at what you do. You can create a beautiful, living world with 10 enemy types or 50 enemy types. You just have to use your imagination and jump into the shoes of the player. You could also argue that being the first game in the franchise set some groundwork in terms of recurring enemies. Staples, as you could call them. Goombas, Koopa Troopas, Mets, Spines. These are the kind of enemies you sprinkle around when you have empty sections in your stage that don't hold any thematic enemies. Not only that, but using these staples can prove to be a legitimately good decision, as simple foes like these help bring any stage alive. In war, you have your common foot soldiers, and amongst them that one Arnold. You see him and you go, fuck this, I'm out. Common enemies like these bring more credibility to the actual threats. It is also important not to give too much health for small foes like these. They are meant to give you a satisfying feeling upon landing that one good shot, and to make you respect the actual threats more. Even though these games definitely have aged, Mario 1 perhaps more than Mega Man 1, to a critical eye, these are still great milestones, and they showcase how something simple can be turned into an actual experience when you're talented enough. This is an era of games that can never be replicated. Limited assets, cartridge space, and knowledge, you do the best you can. And with these two, it was remarkable how they turned something simple into something so involving. Mario with its exceptional stage design, and Mega Man with its living world ready to dispose of you. And that is how you create the first title for your franchise with limited knowledge and experience. So the next time you're developing a game, stop and think for a moment. Maybe you already have all the tools you need.